Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 19 of Teaser season for patch 3.26, Secrets of the Atlas, which is coming out in just a few hours time. 12 hours as at the time I'm recording this video. Today we have a bunch of miscellaneous things, no massive announcements like we've had in the last few days, but also a few important things. And we're going to take another look at a topic that came up yesterday, where I had a number of people reach out to tell me I was definitely wrong about something. They haven't convinced me I was wrong, but they have also decreased my certainty that I was right. More on that later when we come to looking at the patch notes. But firstly, let's get through all the other things. And it's editing GOG here because I realized at the very last second that this take of the video had one very important thing missing from it, and that is the updated version of Path of Building. Path of Building has had some major updates. For those of you that might be newer players, Path of Building is the primary software people use to theorycraft and plan builds in PathOfExile. It is absolutely fantastic. What you want is the Path of Building community fork. That's the version you want. You'll be able to find it on GitHub, and it is fantastic. It has an update. If you've already got the software downloaded, then you can just hit update inside the program. It'll then put in all of the information for 3.26. Not absolutely everything is in-game yet. Certainly the new gems are not in-game yet, but a lot of stuff is, and it's far better than theory crafting by hand. Grinding Games made a news post saying Secrets of the Atlas launches soon and providing a download link to a torrent file. Should you download this torrent file? If you are playing on console, the answer is no. If you're playing on Steam, the answer is no. If you're playing on PC, the answer is also probably no, but it's not definitely no. This is put out for people whose internet connection speed is in the 2 to 3 gigabytes per hour range. If you're in that range and you happen to see this video promptly, then it might be advantageous for you to download the Secrets of the Atlas torrent file. The vast majority of the player base though, your internet connection speed will either be slower than that, in which case it's better just to wait until the patch goes live and start the normal patching process and just wait several hours, or it's faster than that, in which case it's also better just to wait until the patch goes live and start the normal patching process. But there is a little sweet spot, and it's about that sort of speed. The other big thing though that came out with this torrent file, there are people who dig into the torrent file straight away looking for as many secrets as they can unpack from it. And they found nothing. That's right, there have been some changes behind the scenes that basically render existing data mining processes pretty much useless for Secrets of the Atlas. Now, there's a couple of things that data mining can do. Some of these are positive and some of them are negative. The negative is spoiling surprises. The positive aspect though is that sometimes there is an item or there's some sort of interaction that really should never be able to exist on the live servers. An example of this, Grinding Games put out for PathOfExile 2 a new unique tablet that ties into the endgame tower system there that was related to Ritual. This caused massive problems that weren't foreseen within GGG, but that once tens of thousands of people were able to see that this item existed, one or two of them were able to put two and two together and say, oh, this is exactly how I break this item, and this is exactly how I print Mirrors of Kalandra, using something that Grinding Games quite reasonably decided was in fact an exploit. So that would have been prevented if it was possible to data mine unique items in PathOfExile 2. In PathOfExile 1 though, basically nothing can be data mined at the moment, so hopefully nothing along those lines has snuck in. The second thing I want to cover is the challenge rewards, and this was actually announced yesterday rather than today. Here is a stylized depiction of what the armor set that you'll be able to earn by completing challenges within the Mercenaries League. 36 challenges is required if you want to get the whole Watcher's Wrath cosmetic armor set. And if you get less than that, you'll miss out on pieces, so the helmet is the one that comes for challenge 36. So once the patch is live, we'll be able to work out which of those challenges are particularly difficult, which ones are not, and work out some sort of path of least resistance to get through to 36 challenges there. Continuing on the MTX theme, GGG also announced Kirac's Vault. Now, they have a paid version of this. It's their job to sell it to you, not mine, so I'll let them do their job on that. But the free version of it, which everyone gets, when you get to 115 Atlas bonus, that is every single map on the Atlas, including unique maps, you'll receive a primordial key. Most people are speculating that this is one of the keys that allows you access to the new Pinnacle bosses, probably chosen at random. On top of that, you'll also receive Kirac master missions each time that you reach one of these thresholds. Importantly, the first of these thresholds is actually at 1 Atlas completion, the second one is at 8, and the third is at 17. The fourth one's at 27 as well. So those first 4 are pretty early in your progression. This is something that will have a fair bit of an impact on your ability to use Kirac in order to refill your maps early in the league, and also in order to find some of the stubborn maps at the end of your progression. Don't know which tier of master missions you're going to get there. I assume it's probably going to be equal to the highest category of map you've completed so far, but that's something we'll have to find out for certain. The other thing I thought was interesting, at 57 Atlas bonus, you're actually going to get a 100% Delirious map, which I thought was a reasonably interesting reward. I'm not sure again what tier that'll be, and ultimately, whilst 100% Delirious maps aren't something super special, it is something reasonably cool at least. The next piece of news is gameplay related, and this is the Mercenary Renown system. This is a little bit of an update on the way that the mercenaries are going to work. And essentially, there is a hot streak system that's built in. When you encounter a mercenary, they will have some sort of assessment of you based upon your level of fame throughout Ruthless. The more that you have been successfully defeating mercenaries in a row, the more that your renown will go up. Your renown is just going to be a small scale. I think it's just a 1, 2, or 3 star system. But when you're at 3 stars, you'll be more likely to encounter a mercenary that is more difficult and that is more rewarding. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can increase your renown and decrease it. You'll increase your renown by engaging with a mercenary and defeating them in combat. You will decrease your renown by engaging with a mercenary and being defeated by them. Or if you engage with a mercenary, look at their loot and then decide you're not worth my time and you walk off. The mercenary will interpret this as you chickening out, even though your actual decision is, I'm not interested in fighting you for 2 augmentation orbs and a scroll of wisdom. They will interpret that, however, as, ha ha ha, I have intimidated the pitiful exile, watch them quake before my name, they are nothing. And then the next mercenary that you encounter will have a lower impression of you as a result, and be less likely to be one of the infamous ones. Now, these infamous mercenaries, the ones that have a unique item guaranteed and also have a reasonable chance of having either one of the special modifiers on one of their rare items or one of the special gems, you're more likely to encounter these in maps that have a larger number of explicit modifiers on them, and also you are more likely to encounter them in situations where you've had a hot streak, when you've been fighting mercenaries lately. Lastly, if you see a mercenary and you just elect to completely ignore them, for example, they're a striker class, you're not interested in fighting a striker, they're not one of the infamous ones, they're just a basic striker, and you just walk past them without ever talking to them, in that case, they will not change their opinion of you based on that. So that's really the important one there. If you have a look in their pouch though, you are committing to fight them now, unless you're willing to sacrifice some of your renown. Right, so now we're going to have a look at the patch notes, which are the final set of changes here. Firstly, I wanted to go back to the things that came up yesterday when we were talking about party quantity. So there are some overhauls to the way that item quantity is going to work in the context of party play. They're removing a number of effects that affected the amount of drops that players got based upon the party size they were in, and they're consolidating them into a new system. This new system is pretty powerful, and it's going to be 100% more of certain item classes, most importantly currency and gold, per player that is in the party. And the last word we had on this is that mercenaries are going to count as a half. So if you have 6 players plus 6 mercenaries, which the last word we had was they were not certain that was going to be possible, but assuming it is, then that's going to be 900% base currency. If you've got 1 player with no merc, it's going to be 100% base currency. If you've got 3 players and 3 mercs, 450%, and so on and so forth. That's a new system. The old system, however, is something that people reached out to me saying that they thought that I had it wrong. I then went and did a bit of a dig, looking at everything that I could find online that was written before yesterday, and I couldn't find any evidence either way. So, effect on loot of being in a party. This is well documented. This comes up in game. More currency items. The 325 status quo is that there's 250% more currency if you're in a 6-person party. More item quantity, 112%. Some people draw the conclusion that these stack multiplicatively with each other, so you get 642% more currency. That's the status quo, and that's going to be changing to 500% more, i.e. a nerf to party play. My interpretation of the way that it was presented in game was that only the larger of these effects applied, and that you got the 350%. However, I did then take seriously the possibility that the other people were right, and I had a look for anything else that I could find, and the answer was I couldn't find any testing. I had a look at the Prohibited Library Discord, which does a huge amount of testing of various mechanics in game, a whole bunch of testing related to Magic Find, nothing there. I found one thing that was written on the PathOfExile wiki that did indicate that people thought that it did stack multiplicatively, but this was not something that was attributed. And essentially with Magic Find stuff, everything does tend to get researched pretty well and attributed. So I was really surprised this wasn't attributed. I looked into the history of this page and it was one person's individual write-up, but then got adopted because it seemed to mostly be true. I want to be very clear, I think there's a very real chance the people that reached out to me and said that I was misinterpreting the 325 status quo could actually be right. I just can't find any evidence that they definitely are. My own personal feeling though, from running in 6-player, what you might term casual groups, where you're not really grouping with other veteran players on a super min-max basis, but just grouping up with other people for a bit of a laugh. Something I highly recommend trying if your PC is capable of doing it. It is a lot of fun. This did not feel like I was getting 7.5 times the currency. It felt like we were getting 3.5 times it. But that is definitely not rigorously tested, so both outcomes are possible. As far as the economic consequences of this change, what I think is going to happen is there's a couple of items that are now only for group players as a result of this. But I did have a look trying to think of everything that is going to be affected in this way, and it's really not as many as I thought yesterday. So firstly, Maven's Chisel of Avarice. This is going to be far better on tier 17 maps in 6-player groups than it will be for anyone else. As well as that, these things are rare enough that you definitely should not use them in solo play outside really unusual setups. Secondly, and related, Ambush Scarab of Containment. Ambush Scarab of Containment is very, very rare. It's mythic rarity, and it's something that adds a lot of just default monsters into a map, which means that it ends up being something that scales up the amount of currency that drops there. And as a result, group players are simply going to be able to outbid solo players for this Scarab. Likewise, Horn Scarab of Bloodlines, exactly the same reason. But other than those, I don't think it's as bad as I thought it was yesterday, because I was looking through all of the other sorts of Scarabs that people tend to use a lot at endgame, and most of them actually don't really interact all that much with the core drop pool loot. A good example of this is the Horn Scarab of Pandemonium. This is a high-end juicing strategy one, but it's something that doesn't really gain all that much from being used in conjunction with the party play multipliers anymore. So I'm going to pull back a little bit from how strident I was yesterday, but I am generally of the opinion that this is a genuinely bad change for the game, especially given that Sanctum, which was the solo player's equivalent, the solo player's way of getting a lot of raw currency drops, given that Sanctum is being nerfed, I don't think that this is a good change. I think 100% is simply too high a number, and that something closer to 70% would be right. The ideal situation is that someone like Empyrean, that is an endgame min-maxer, but that likes to play in a party, that he is fine playing in a party. He doesn't feel the 325 pressure to split the group. But then at the same time, someone like Fubgun that's more inclined to play solo and is equally as much a power gamer as Empyrean, that Fubgun is also happy to play solo. I think that's the best situation for people at the top end of play, and also for that to be replicated amongst more casual players as well. That would be the ideal situation, and I think a number closer to 70% would achieve that better than a number like 100%. Lastly, of course, because mercenaries count as half a player last we heard, this is going to mean that currency drops, as long as you can keep your mercenary alive, are going to feel higher for most people. So, old patch notes out of the way, let's have a look at the new patch notes. Firstly, we have a very high impact one that's going to affect almost everyone, and that is that the old method of recombinating is no longer available in Ruthless leagues. Okay, a bit more seriously, maps on the Atlas screen now show uncollected crafting recipes. This is going to be a fantastic QOL change. It's not a massive one. It might occasionally be annoying if you run a map that's unpleasant. Like, let's say that you run something along the lines of Flooded Mine map that you only ever really want to run once. You forget to collect the crafting recipe in it, and then your Atlas is constantly showing you, hey, here's a reminder that you did Flooded Mine, but you forgot to collect the crafting recipe. And then at some point you're probably going to go, okay, I'll do it. I'll go back into a Flooded Mine and I'll collect this recipe that I have no intention of using. So there's a tiny downside to this, but mostly it's just a really big quality of life change and something that people should be happy with. Sanctum. Sanctum is getting more gold. This is not the only change that's being made when it comes to gold from side content. So why don't we talk about self-casting buffs next? There is a buff that's coming to a support gem. That support gem is called Pinpoint Support. Now this is something that uses the intensity mechanic, and the intensity mechanic is something that is quite complex, but there is a caster mastery that lets you scale up its maximum from 3 to 4. That's the main thing you need to know in order to parse this gem. So, Pinpoint Support. Supported skills deal a bit less damage and they fire additional projectiles. Hey, this is something vaguely like lesser or greater multiple projectiles, but it has a big twist on it. It is only something that can support spells. It is also something that can only support spells that you cast yourself. No proxies allowed. No totems, no traps, no mines. You've got to cast them yourself in order to use this support gem. And here's the payoff. Supported spells gain intensity when you cast them, up to a maximum of 3, or 4 if you have the caster mastery. Supported spells by default fire 3 additional projectiles, but this decreases by 1 for each intensity you've got. So what happens if you're casting Fireball and your intensity goes up to 4? Well, your Fireballs deal a fantastic 80% more damage with hits per intensity. Granted, they are losing some of this back, but this is still one of the best support gems in the game. However, the number of projectiles you fire, it's 1 by default, +3 for this text, and then -4 for this text for 0. Pinpoint Support ends up meaning that you can't really use it alongside that intensity mastery, which then means that the numbers on it are really bad. Well, in 3.26, this is being fixed. Pinpoint Support is now going to overrule the minimum number of projectiles your Fireball can yeet out to 1, and as a result, Pinpoint is no longer going to crangle it. You're still going to fire out 1 projectile all the time, and that 1 is going to be super juiced. Ultimately, the idea here is that you've got damage projection when you need it, and then when you can stand your ground and fire repeatedly on a tough monster, then you sacrifice that damage projection to instead essentially have your greater multiple projectiles morph itself into something that is the opposite of greater multiple projectiles, something that decreases your projectile performance, but that increases your damage instead. Really, really good set of changes here. Next, we have a number of changes that have been made to the character power passive tree. These were actually known about because they were in the JSON file. So this is something that players have been able to look at, but we'll go through them all here because they're now official in the patch notes. Worthy Foe Ascendancy passive skill is weaker than it used to be. Champion as a whole package, though, is still much stronger than it used to be. Worthy Foe is one of the good, but not absolute must-take things in Champion. Most people will take it, not quite everyone, I believe, and it's getting nerfed from 20% down to 15%. That said, Champion much stronger than it was last league. Champion definitely will be a meta Ascendancy this league. Saboteur, you can now path to Pyromaniac through Born in the Shadows. So there's an additional way to connect your tree together. This is a big, big upside. Ascendant Guardian is getting changed a bit. Now this is one of those things that is sometimes positive, sometimes negative. It is really going to depend upon your exact build. But this is essentially the Ascendant is going to be mirroring the changes that are made to the main Guardian Ascendancy. If you are a pure Aura bot, this is negative. If you are an Aura stacker, this is positive mostly, maybe not quite always, and all in all, it's pretty mixed. Ascendant Saboteur is also getting a bit of a buff there. Also, these changes apply to Ruthless as well. Other changes in the passive skill tree, the Bannerman notable now clarifies that only your banner buffs linger on you when you leave the banner area. So it's not going to apply to other buffs that aren't related to the banner. Item changes, these are at the smaller end, but they're all quite important for some people. The Domination Scarab of Apparitions is getting another little bit of an overhaul. The apparitions from it are now going to deal substantially more damage. This is Scarab I'm surprised didn't get a complete overhaul. Be interesting to see whether the nerf version ends up being worth using or not. Items drop on death if equipped by an animated guardian. We talked about this on another day. There was an exploit fix on it. This is the second exploit fix. This applies to the synthesized version of this modifier. Life Leech mods on weapons now scale higher than they used to. They're still bad. Mana Leech modifiers on weapons, these scale higher than they used to. They're still bad. Life Leech and Mana Leech options on essences and crafting bench modifiers, these scale higher than they used to. They're still bad. And now we have probably the most exciting change for a lot of people here, gold balance. Remove penalties to gold that existed on monsters and chest in Heist. Also in Blight. Increase the amount of gold given at the end of each simulacrum wave. Reduce penalties to gold that existed on monsters in Delve. Lowered gold penalties on breach monsters, abyss chests, delirium monsters, beyond monsters, legion monsters, incursion monsters in maps, incursion monsters in temples, and of course on bestiary monsters. These changes are fantastic. Hopefully, we end up in a situation where you don't feel like you're punished for running the wrong content when it comes to gold. Ultimately, if all the options end up feeling reasonably viable, then that's where we want to be. We shall find out where we actually are. Editing Gog just wants to add here that the meta strategy in Heist will still generate almost no gold because the meta strategy is basically to kill next to no monsters, but this is going to empower the option of not following the meta strategy and then getting a reasonable amount of gold potentially out of your Heist, which is good. And that's what we've got for the final day of Teaser Season for patch 3.26. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.